Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures. Whether you're a cybersecurity entrepreneur, somebody in the cybersecurity field, you are going to run into some sort of cybersecurity policy or framework where you're going to have conflicting recommendations and requirements. I'm going to talk about why that is in this video called Harmonizing Compliance. Now, my background, I worked at the NSA. I ran Tenable Network Security for 16 years, and now I run Gula Tech Adventures. I ran into all sorts of chief information security officers, cybersecurity vendors, and even while running Tenable, conflicting recommendations for cybersecurity, how you should be secure. In this video, we're going to talk about why that is. Now, the impetus for this video is the CISA organization is starting an effort to do compliance harmonization. This is not the number one thing that are going to be on a lot of people's organizations, but it's something, or top things to do. But it's, from my point of view, this really makes our industry a lot better, and I'll get into why of that. Now, if you've seen RoboCop 2, there's a scene in the movie where they give RoboCop a whole bunch of recommendations designed by committee. It makes him hard for RoboCop to do his job protecting the public. And although I've actually met a lot of people on these committees, their intent is really good, producing really good frameworks for their constituents. But often, if you're a layperson outside of that, it looks like a bunch of not well-intended stuff put together. Now, I volunteer on the Center for Internet Security Technology Advisory Group. They're doing a great job of trying to really, what makes sense, try to get down to the bone of what does it really mean to be secure. I've had other conversations with members of people who do MITRE ATT&CK, who do the NIST cybersecurity framework and so on. There's a lot of positive intent out there, but at the end of the day, there's still the security person who's trying to comply, and they end up like RoboCop, unable to kind of really decide what's right. Now, why is that? Well, one, we would all think that all of these standards are going after the same goal. The reality is these standards and frameworks are often very different. I'll give you a very high-level example. If you use a credit card, everybody involved with that credit card is subject to something called the Payment Card Industry Standard. It's not a government standard. This is a standard that the credit cards came up with. And it's all about protecting the credit card, right? We don't want to lose the credit card. If you do a denial of service attack on an e-commerce website, although that's a bad day and you don't have sales, there really isn't a whole lot that the payment card industry says about that. This is a classic example. Whereas if you're a Department of Defense standard, you really don't want the Russians or Chinese to be able to do a denial of service standard attack on your infrastructure. Two classic different examples out there about why you might have conflicting guidance or actually silence in some areas of basic cybersecurity hygiene standards. Now, another issue is because since we're all human, many of these standards are just written and they have some issues with the ambiguity. They're not written by lawyers. They're written by multiple people doing multiple reviews. And a lot of times you have conversations where should, would, must all have completely different implications for how you do things at the technical level of implementation. And sometimes, a standard will just say, hey, go do something like the NIST cybersecurity framework or the Center for Internet Security best practices. Center for Internet Security has 3 levels. Some of these standards don't say which level of Center for Internet Security you're supposed to do. So a lot of this, just because of the way we write things, it becomes ambiguous and struggling to implement it. Now, when I was the CEO of Tenable, one of the things that we tried to do is, as we did our configuration audits, our log collection, our vulnerability management cycles, we could actually also do a configuration audit. So you can actually take a lot of these standards and you can do an actual automated approach for doing this. The government has a standard called XCCDF. That's not a compliance standard. That's a way to automate how you're doing this testing. The cool thing about that is you can then basically look at your entire infrastructure and say, am I doing a good job? Now, not all controls are something that you can automate. Like you can't automate, hey, did I give 90% of my employees phishing training? Did I give them awareness training for supply chain vendor management? That sort of thing. But technical controls are a really interesting thing. And while I was doing this, I had a great team. They produce all the technical requirements to look at a Windows computer, a Cisco router. You could actually go to other organizations and get certified by that. The Center for Internet Security does this actually for many vendors out there. They want to work with the community in doing that. So during that process, you run into a lot of really minutia of like, what does it really mean to submit a print job to a printer in a secure fashion? Or what does it really mean to, to do different types of logging levels, especially when you have different types of technology out there, such as Linux, Windows, routers, switches, and so on. Now, another thing that kind of makes these things a little bit different, all these frameworks, is that over time, things have changed. If you say, we're going to update this framework, just any given framework every 3 years, well, think about how fast things change over 3 years' time. Some of these frameworks don't even update that fast. They do 4 years, 5 years. Think about the improvements we've had in cloud, in CI/CD, being able to manage things in the cloud, mobility, doing virtualization, doing things like automated patching of systems. There's a lot of different things that have changed over the years. And then also we've had a lot of different major changes in cybersecurity. We had the Log4j vulnerability, right, with the most widely pushed vulnerability that got patched fairly pretty quick. So sometimes these regulations don't keep up with the new technology that's out there. And if you look at many of these regulations over time, you can see glaring omissions in technology. For example, the Center for Internet Security Common Controls for the longest time never even mentioned phones, never even mentioned mobile devices. And if you think about the future where mobile and phone and virtualization and zero trust web browsing and browsing with somebody else's virtual computer, that's the world we're heading towards. And in the world of BYOD, work from home, zero trust, it's almost, we're ready to have a new refresh on all these models that are out there. Now, inevitably what happens though is that all these standards, you end up having somebody whose job putting into a spreadsheet, managing all of your minimum baselines and all of your exceptions. So the exceptions are things that you're supposed to be compliant with, but for whatever reason, you've gotten some other control. Like maybe you have to have desktop encryption, but you have this server in a locked room with 3 people and only they can access it. Maybe you don't need to have encryption. You can get an exception. So you need to do exception tracking. The other thing is that if you're being compliant with like 8 or 9 regimens out there, maybe you don't have to audit each computer for each different regimen. You have to just understand what the minimum is. Maybe one standard says your password needs to be 10 characters or 2-factor authentication. And another standard says you have to have 2-factor authentication. Therefore, if you have 2-factor authentication, you're compliant with those standards. Managing this in a large organization, a large policy, very difficult. There's a lot of commercial products that do this. 99% of the time I see people using some sort of spreadsheet. Now, what does this mean for the common person? It means absolutely nothing, right? We're really talking about a fundamental, just trying to kind of keep things, make them easier. Who it makes a difference for is us. As a standard, if you're a lawyer and you're a pilot, you never hear somebody saying that, well, I'm going to use this particular type of judicial standard, when I'm protecting you at trial. Or when the pilot's taken off on Southwest, it's like, oh, we're flying with the blah, blah, blah standard. No, it makes our industry a much more professional industry, a much more consistent industry. And I think as we evolve, you're going to see even more people kind of have more commonality. If you read all these standards, 99% of them are, maybe more like 90%, are very, very, very similar. So the more we can have harmonization of these compliance standards, the more we can have a professional industry. It's something I'm definitely a fan of for. Thanks for watching. I'm Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures. Feel free to subscribe to this channel. Visit us at gula.tech or connect with us on LinkedIn. Have a great day.